Alaric's gloved hand scraped the last layer of wind, baked sand from the tablet, and the concentric rings came into view like mechanical scars. Suspicion tightened his jaw as he traced the outermost ring with a fingertip and found the same repeating mark he'd seen on other fragments. A small, carved notch paired with a ritual marginalia. "Maya, look, this one repeats," he said without turning, and his voice carried across the trench. Maya Resnick crouched beside him, her lamp illuminating the tablet's shallow grooves. She leaned forward and whispered, "It aligns with the Southern City records. The discovery was immediate, physical, and urgent. The rings did not chart harvests or festivals, they mapped decline." He felt suspicion root each choice, from the first scrape of clay to the decision to bring the tablet above ground that evening. Alaric did not warm to sensational claims. He examined objects by motion, by measurement. Now his hands moved faster. "We document now," he ordered, "no removal. Photographs, impressions, in situ." Maya tapped her phone camera and spoke the numbers as she adjusted exposure. A shadow moved at the trench edge. Sargon Rahim arrived with a lamp and a coat thick from the cold. He did not greet them. He crouched, read the rings, and folded his arms. Context arrived in concrete detail within minutes. The dig lay outside a ruined ziggurat 40 kilometers from the nearest town, the sky bruised purple with dusk, the trench edges taped and rock-lined, and a portable generator humming 2 tent lengths away. Alaric had been on this dig 6 weeks, mapping astronomical tablets and ritual ledgers. He knew the archive team and their routines. Now the baselane shifted. "Sargon, this has to be secured." He did not ask. He demanded. The danger was not abstract. The core conflict was visible. The tablet predicted collapse, and someone had reasons to bury that fact. They lifted the tablet under a tarpaulin to the makeshift conservation table. Alaric laid it on cotton and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He read aloud the first ring aloud for Maya. "First ring. When the 12th return wanes, the roof falls in the 3rd city." Maya's fingers went cold against the lamp switch. She answered, "That's matching the Southern inscription catalogue." 3 collapses on identical intervals. The discovery triggered an immediate worry in Alaric that was not fear yet, but a practical alarm he could measure. Who would be harmed if this reached officials or the public? Sargon spoke while flipping the tablet to show a panel of scratched marginalia. "These aren't predictions for harvest. They are instructions for ritual timing and the sealing of public records." This was not meant for wide circulation. He tapped the carved notch. "The archive altered records. Portions of our holdings have odd absences." The last sentence as if it were proof and accusation in the same breath. Alaric's hands tightened on the tablet's edges. He felt a second emotion arrive after suspicion, alarm. He acted on it by ordering extra precautions. "Secure the tent," he said. "Chain the access." Full inventory. Maya pulled a canvas curtain across the bench. They began transcribing. Alaric worked with a magnifier and inkless impressions. He moved intentionally. Index finger tracing the rings, pencil marking his notes, breath held when a glyph did not match expected patterns. Professor Layla Ashore called in on a satellite link. Her voice came through a cracked speaker. "Alaric, read me the outer ring." He read it. Leela paused. "If you are right, this is political dynamite. We cannot release until we know intent." Alaric met Maya's eyes. "Maya, intent matters, yes, but hiding it." She did not finish. The line cut. The remote argument forced a choice between scholarly transparency and institutional caution. Doubt surfaced in Alaric's movements. He hesitated before sending raw images to the university server. He felt doubt change to a sharper emotion when Sargon left the tent to make a call. Alaric overheard Sargon speaking firmly into a satellite phone. "Secure it. Remove the original. We'll handle the release time." Alaric's jaw clenched. The action forced his hand. He whispered to Maya, "Copy everything high resolution now. No originals leave this tent until we catalog." Her response was a nod and the small click of a camera shutter. Late that night the lab tent smelled of oil, dust, and the iron tang of solder. Alaric worked while Maya overlaid star charts on a light table. She moved translucent sheets until repeating glyph sequences aligned with recorded eclipses and a set of northern star risings there. Maya pointed to a sequence where 3 glyphs repeated every 63 years. Look at the dates linked to urban layers: abandonment, conflagration, palace collapse. Alaric traced a pattern with his thumbnail and realized the marks matched historical collapses catalogued in unglamorous municipal ledgers. Tax rolls halted, grain distributions ceased, and population registers showed gaps. The tablet's cycles matched those absences. He felt the emotion shift again. Alarm folded into a cold certainty that this calendar tracked civilizational failure. Alaric called up photos of known tablets. He compared chisel marks, the clay composition, and the ring spacing. The copy he made contained an extra sealed sigil under the outer ring. A small indentation hardened with a resin. When Maya ran a microprobe, she discovered a minute cavity and, concealed beneath it, a carved amulet. Sargon entered the tent before they could remove it. He looked at the amulet and his voice dropped. That mark belongs to a custodial order used by vault keepers. Whoever bound this calendar intended control, not prediction. Tension edged into confrontation. Sargon attempted to order immediate custody. He spoke to the site radios and requested official pickup. Alaric argued back, "Sargon, if you hand it to them now, we'll lose context." "We need controlled study," Sargon replied, "and if we publish, we cause panic." "I've seen governments move when such things surface," Maya interjected. "Then we make a responsible release. Catalog, peer review, then public notice." The argument sharpened into rapid exchanges. "You would leak it." "Sargon, I would document it." Alaric answered, "You re-risking the site." Sargon snapped, "And you re-risking the truth." Alaric shot back. The dialogue moved fast, 3 to 6 lines in quick succession, each line short and decisive. Voices rose. A site official banged on the tent flap. Someone outside called for calm. The external event arrived. A security vehicle idled at the gate. Alaric stepped back from the table and counted options like entries in a ledger. He felt suspicion and then a surge of resolve. He could not let institutional erasure erase context. He paced the tent and took a deliberate action. He authorized Maya to make a high-resolution digital archive, then to transmit a mirror to a secure off-site node. "Do it now," he said. Maya worked the scanner with steady hands. Sargon watched the transfer and clenched his jaw. "You shouldn't be uploading this," he said. The transfer completed and the file left the tent. Sargon cursed under his breath. At midnight, Professor Layla's voice returned, firmer. "Alaric, listen. There will be fallout. The artifacts you publish could be used to destabilize fragile regions. There are ministries watching. Consider containment." Alaric touched the tablet and felt the clay's irregular texture. He answered, "We consider context first. The public deserves to know methods, not headlines." Layla did not accept that. The call ended with a softened warning and an implied consequence: career risk. Alaric felt the emotion shift again, from resolve to a restrained fear for professional survival. Maya overlaid the star charts again and then looked up sharply. "Alaric, these coordinates line up with recorded collapses, 5 cycles apart. That notch marks the latest window. Look." She placed her finger on the ring. The marker aligned with a date that converted to a modern equivalent 6 weeks ahead. The tent seemed to gather sound. Generator hum, the rasp of tent cloth, boots on sand. Alaric read the calculated window and felt the room compress into a single decision point. The calendar had not predicted prosperity, it marked an approach. Sargon walked outside to make his phone call to field officials. He returned with a somber face. "There have been substitutions in the archive." "Sargon, portions were excised decades ago. My predecessor warned me the collection was curated to avoid panic." The revelation recast the tablet from antiquarian curiosity to evidence of a policy. Alaric's hands loosened and then clenched. Betrayal entered his emotional path. He thought of rulers and custodians who had chosen erasure over explanation. "Show me the altered records." Sargon produced a sealed dossier and flipped to a page with redacted columns. Alaric scanned the stamp. It read, "Controlled access." The twist changed how he understood earlier absences. Outside, the sky paled toward dawn. A physical scramble followed. Sargon reported via radio that officials were en route to collect the artifact. He moved to block the tent hatch. Alaric grabbed the original tablet and handed it to a conservation tray. "I will not let you remove it without documentation," he told Sargon. Sargon reached for the radio and called security. Hands pushed at the tent entrance. Alaric felt a surge of fear and a clearer resolve. He acted. He hid microfilm with the high-resolution copies inside his satchel's lining and gave Maya a set of encrypted files on a USB concealed in her jacket. The confiscation came in the early morning light. Site officials arrived with identification and a chain of custody form. They had authority and wore heavy coats. Sargon presented the tablet with a controlled expression. "This will be transferred to central custody," an official announced. Alaric watched the original slide into a padded case. He saw Maya's face go pale. He stepped forward and placed his palm on the case. "I have partial copies," he said. "We must document handling and condition." The official showed a stamped order. "You will be required to surrender originals." The tent became a theater of negotiation. Alaric felt anger flare and then settle into a deliberate bargaining tone. He negotiated for more time to record inscriptions and to stabilize the artifact. They permitted a final conservation run under supervision. Alaric worked with measured speed while officials photographed the procedure. He found, under a sealed resin patch, a tiny carved amulet tucked into a cavity beneath the outer ring. He did not pull it out completely. He pried and released the amulet so it slipped into a small tray. Sargon watched with narrowed eyes and said, "That is a custodial seal. That proves intentional suppression." Alaric held the amulet with tweezers and felt its cool weight. He then noticed, on the high-resolution print, a marginal glyph he had not seen in the field. A minute notation indicating prescriptive use, not passive forecasting. The realization hit in precise, physical terms. The calendar did not merely track events, it instructed timing for collapse-related rites. Officials loaded the padded case onto a transport vehicle. Alaric managed to slip microfilm and encrypted files into his satchel moments before the tent flap closed. He felt the small amulet's presence in his hand like a decision he could not yet articulate. Sargon stood by the vehicle as it drove away. He nothing. Maya hugged her knees in the corner of the tent and breathed rapidly. Alaric walked the perimeter and recorded the chain of custody on his field notebook, then paused to place the marginal glyph photograph face down against his heart for a moment of study. He did not allow himself narrative emotion, he catalogued sensations. His hands trembled when he thought of the ritual timing, his mouth tasted of metal from adrenaline, and his breathing shortened. Late that night, Alaric sat alone on his sleeping cot. He spread the high-resolution copy across his lap and leaned in under a single lamp. He read the marginal glyph again and felt a new shift. From alarm and betrayal to grim determination. He touched the glyph with a forefinger and rehearsed options aloud. We verify the calendar's range. We check municipal records. We trace the custodial orders. He wrote a list with a pencil and punctuated each line with a small dot. He realized he could prove intent if he found earlier directives matching the glyph's sign. He also realized others might already know, and that the museum's alterations hinted at institutional collusion. That calculation brought no comfort. A surprise followed. Alaric ran a spectral analysis of the resin sealing and found traces of a compound used by a single known custodial decades ago. The presence of that compound turned suspicion into an evidentiary lead. He called Maya. "Maya, the resin matches custodial guild specs from Record 1924. She then someone with access altered the archive. The twist clarified motive. It was concrete. Reason composition, guild records, and a marked serial number on the amulet. The numbers matched an old inventory stamped into vault logs. Alaric copied the log entry into his notebook and circled the names of those listed as signatories. He slept in fits and drafts. When he awoke to the generator's grind, he packed his small kit with methodical movements. He placed the high-resolution copy into a leather folio, inserted the microfilm into his satchel pocket, and clipped his obsidian signet ring to the lining. He checked that his annotated codex lay under his arm. The final act of the chapter was precise. He folded the photograph of the marginal glyph, slid it into the codex between 2 pages, and zipped the satchel shut. He left the tent and walked toward the perimeter gate. A vehicle engine idled in the distance, and someone called orders in a calm, organized tone. Alaric stopped, put his hand on the satchel, and waited for what would come next. The marginal glyph remained visible in his mind, and in the copied ring, a small, physical thing that changed the meaning of every ledger line he had read that week. He had begun the evening with suspicion. He had moved through alarm, betrayal, and a tightened resolve to act. The chapter closed on a concrete beat. Alaric slips the high-resolution copy into his satchel and hears a single vehicle engine starting beyond the perimeter fence. He closes the tent flap and waits, the marginal glyph still pressed to the page. The crate lid gave with a dry snap under Alaric's crowbar, and the ring lay half buried in compacted sand like a pale wound. Suspicion tightened his jaw. He had seen tool marks before, but never a surface sanded deliberately to hide an edge. "Miriam, look at this," he said. And his voice cut across the vault like a measured command. Miriam Caldy knelt opposite him and brushed powder from the clay until a ring of concentric bands showed through, each band scored with repeating notches, and one full quadrant gone cleanly. The immediate problem was concrete. Someone had removed a quadrant on purpose, not by decay, and that removal erased whole sets of dates. Alaric pushed the crate open further and lifted the tablet with gloved hands, keeping his fingers away from the sanded edge. He remembered scraping the outer rings on the first tablet he found in the trench. The marks matched the pattern he traced in Chapter 1. His memory of that scrape was a practical one. The ridge of concentric rings, the tiny paired notches, a cold ridge of fired clay beneath his fingertip. That concrete memory guided his next move. He did not pause to wonder. He carried the crate toward the reading table and set the tablet under the vault lamp. Suspicion moved into the room with him and settled into method. Alaric's first action was cataloging the damage in the museum ledger, rubbing pencil across the page, and making 3 terse notes. Crate sanded, quadrant missing, possible classified provenance. He glanced at Miriam, who logged this crate. He asked. Miriam tapped her tablet and read aloud, entry 912, donated via private transfer, condition. Altered surface, her face tightened. Someone tried to disguise import traces, she said. Her hands were steady, but her voice carried a clipped edge that showed alarm through action. Within minutes, an inspector arrived with a badge that smelled of bureaucracy and cheap cologne. Hassan Rahim did not step into the vault. He stayed in the doorway and pointed at the tablet without touching it. Seal it down, he said. This object is now classified property. Close it and file the transfer. Alaric folded his arms over the satchel at his hip. Inspector Rahim, we must examine the surface. There are palimpsest traces beneath the sanding. Hassan cut him off with a brusque motion. You will not examine specifics without clearance. I warn you, Jura. Morrow, certain catalogue items are handled at higher level. The warning was a thinly veiled threat, and it had teeth. Alaric felt the room shift into an institutional squeeze. The denial hardened Alaric's suspicion into a narrower focus. He leaned low and studied Hassan's hands. No ring, no obvious insignia, but the right wrist bore a faint tan line where a watch had been removed recently. Small details mattered. Who transferred this crate? Alaric. Hassan closed his mouth and replied, confidential. The museum is to cooperate, Miriam interjected. You can simply reseal it. There may be contextual data in the sand. Hassan's jaw moved. Seal it, Ms. Caldy. That is an order. He left a malevolent suggestion in the room and shut the vault door behind him. The vault door's steel clack sounded like a countdown. Alaric and Miriam worked under time pressure. They moved with deliberate speed. He pulled gloves from his satchel and laid the tablet on a conservation board. Graduate assistant Aya Karim arrived with a magnifier and a portable light, her breath fogging briefly in the cool archive air. Alaric, I checked the donated ledger. Aya, the private transfer traces back to an intermediary named Silas Corvin in the art markets. He brokers to collectors, not museums. Her words intersected with Hassan's warning and made the institutional caution look less neutral and more protective of private interests. They began mechanical cleaning. Alaric scraped at the sanded surface with a scalpel and a soft brush, while Aya swabbed with a conservation solvent in measured drops. Under the sanded clay, a faint ink of older marks glimmered. Palimpsest lines, a faint overlay of star charts and marginal ritual notes scrawled in a fast, cramped hand. Alaric held the magnifier and saw words cut into the clay with an awl-notched symbols paired with astronomical glyphs. The notes were not about planting schedules or harvests. They discussed scheduled dates and ritual cessation. Aya's lips moved. These are not agricultural notations. She said they were timed directives. An emotion shift occurred as academic curiosity altered into alarm. Alaric's hands did not tremble, but he rubbed his thumb along the edge until grit gathered under his nail. Show me the repeating notches, he said. They overlaid the visible counts with a torn city chronology Miriam smuggled from a closed file. The marks aligned with sudden falls, burned citadels, mass departures, abrupt abandonment dates. The pattern resolved in the light like a mechanical schedule. If these correspond, Aya whispered, it implies coordination across centuries. Her whisper was taught with disbelief. They worked through the night. Every 3 paragraphs an external event occurred. A delivery during the night that was misrouted, a power surge that briefly dimmed the lamp, a locked file cabinet forced open with a spare key. At 4 a.m., Alaric slid a translucent overlay across the tablet and traced the notches with a red pencil. He marked positions where the notches matched recorded collapses in the city chronologies. The mechanical regularity was unmistakable. Events clustered along intervals too regular for mere coincidence. This doesn't predict harvests, he instructed. It predicts stoppage. Aya exhaled and her shoulders tightened. The word stoppage translated alarm into a protocol. The ring scheduled ruin. Midway through the second hour, a man in a dark coat appeared in the reading room foyer without knocking. He introduced himself as Silas Corvin and smiled with practiced neutralities. Dear Morrow, he said, you have something that interests private patrons. His voice was pleasant, his eyes quick and assessing. Miriam's hand hovered over the panic button under the desk and then withdrew. Silas, Miriam, stepping forward. We need provenance paperwork. This crate came without acceptable transfer documents. Silas inclined his head. Some things travel in other ways. I can facilitate access for a fee. The offer carried a threat through implication rather than sound. Silas's appearance moved suspicion from institutions to the market. He placed a slim portfolio on the desk and tapped the corner with a manicured finger. Collectors suffered losses over similar pieces, he said. They prefer not to be reminded. They buy silence. Alaric kept his tone flat. Silas, if you want access, we can arrange formal channels. No one here trades in secrets. Silas laughed softly. You misunderstand, Jurta Moro. I'm not buying a tablet. I'm buying Eresha. His sentence was a pivot that changed the dynamic. It meant private buyers actively removed evidence. Alaric's jaw tightened. He had to decide whether to engage or to lock the tablet away. The next emotional shift began as annoyance and hardened into resolve. Alaric refused to hand the tablet to market forces. He ordered Miriam to photograph the palimpsest and instructed Aya to run a multispectral scan. Aya, get wavelengths from 500 to 900 nanometers, he said. She moved with methodical speed, her fingers indexing the handheld scanner and calibrating a dark frame. The scan revealed under-surface ink that did not match the visible notches. Faint marginalia described ritual timings paired with astronomical conjunctions. Alaric read a line aloud. When the ring marks coincide with the third city crescent, do not save. Let the structure fall. He let the sentence hang and then shut his mouth. They overlaid the ring's repeating notch pattern with city chronologies tiled across a wooden board. Miriam's fingernail traced a notched point and then stopped at a blank quadrant. This quadrant is removed, not broken, she said. Someone made sure those dates cannot be read. Hassan Rahim's earlier order echoed in the room. They wanted those dates gone, not by accident. Alaric felt a new pressure. The clock on the ring's inner bands pointed toward an approaching alignment in only months. He exhaled and measured the angular counts on the tablet. If this is a schedule, he said, then the next marked collapse is already on its way. He moved to call an academic colleague in a neighboring city and then stopped. His phone screen showed a blocked number. He looked up and found Silas standing near the doorway again, watching. You should leave. Silas softly. There is a threshold between curiosity and danger. Those who cross it often do not like the consequences. Aya slammed the book shut. The simple action converted warning into a tangible friction. At first light, the archive experienced a breach. Men with forged credentials and faces hidden beneath low caps entered the vault with precision. Alaric saw them appear in the doorway and pushed Aya behind a filing cabinet without thinking. His movement was a reflex, training his body to protect evidence. One agent moved with a torch toward the conservation table and barked, hands away from the artifact. His tone demanded compliance. Silas stepped forward and gave a curt nod. Now, he said, secure the tablet. Confrontation unfolded in quick, violent folds, the chapter's climax. Alaric planted himself in front of the table. You will not remove this without legal process, he said. An agent reached and grabbed the corner of the conservation board. Alaric twisted and clamped his hands over the tablet. Alaric, Miriam, voice tight. You will get us all hurt, the agent shoved. Alaric countered with an elbow and a low grunt. Aya lunged to pry the agent's hand free. Words became commands and the room filled with the sounds of scuffling bodies and overturned chairs. Rapid dialogue exchange punctuated the raid. What is this? The lead agent demanded. Why are you blocking us? Alaric answered. It's museum property. This is not your right, the agent snapped. We have orders, Alaric barked. Whose orders? Silas cut in. Private patrons dread a morrow. They financed the transfer. They financed the removal. This is above museum protocol, Miriam shouted. We will call the director. The agent hissed. No phones. Now, the back and forth ran 6 lines long, each line shifting stakes and revealing alliances. Voices rose and fell like a measured tempo of pressure. Action turned physical. A lamp crashed. Sand flew into the agent's face, and someone struck a match to burn a corner of the conservation board. Alaric grabbed the tablet and shoved it under his coat with a practiced motion he had never used before. Aya cried out, Alaric, no! He moved toward the vault door, Miriam falling in behind him to block an agent's pursuit. The lead agent lunged and knocked Alaric sideways. The tablet skidded and the outer ring caught flame. Smoke rose in a thin column and blotted the lamp's halo. The mini, cliffhanger hitter's doors slammed and alarms began to bleed into the air. For a moment the tablet rolled toward the vault mouth and a gloved boot halted it. Someone shouted, Burn it! The command hovered, and every person in the room made a split-second choice. Alaric kicked the tablet away from the flame and grabbed a fire extinguisher, pressing the lever until foam covered the scorched outer band. The outer quadrant had been ripped free or consumed. Only a smoke-streaked inner ring remained. The sudden loss changed what they could know. After the raid, the archive smelled of extinguisher foam and wet ash. Authorities cleared the room for paperwork, and Hassan Rahim reappeared holding a sealed envelope, stamped with an emblem the museum staff had never seen. He slid the envelope across the table with a mechanical hand. This is catalog level classification. he said. "You will comply. The item is to be transferred to a secure facility." Alaric thumbed the scorched edge of the inner ring and found intact notches along the remaining inner band. He lifted the salvaged fragment into the light and catalogued new clues. A faint trace of red pigment and a thumbprint in the clay's inner curve. The aftermath required decisions, and the chapter moved toward a quieter, ominous resolution. Miriam and Aya packed evidence into legal paper wrappings, their hands precise, but their movements carrying anxiety through tight gestures. "Alaric, this could be dangerous." "Miriam, you know what happens when private collectors get involved." Alaric folded the inner ring into his palm and felt its weight. He checked the overlay, aligned the remaining notches with the chronologies, and marked the next date with a pencil. The date lay within weeks. He did not say the date aloud. He circled it on a small sheet and slid it into his annotated codex. They had a small victory. The inner ring survived. They had a significant loss. The outer quadrant was gone and counted events could no longer be read in full. Aya examined the thumbprint carefully and then grinned briefly. "It's partial, but we can run for a ridge match against our donor database," she said. Miriam's mouth set. "Do it." And discreetly, the two women moved with practical speed, and the emotional temperature shifted toward determination. Alaric watched them work and checked his pockets for tools. The decision in his face made his next move clear. Alaric made a concrete choice. He placed the salvaged inner ring into his annotated codex, wrapped it in a dark cloth, and tucked it into his satchel alongside the ledger notes and Miriam's photographs. He paused to strap the satchel and then wrote a brief instruction to Aya. "A copy scans and send to secure account. No cloud, use physical courier." He folded the note and handed it to her. "Aya, deliver this as to the observatory. Do not discuss it with museum staff." Aya nodded, took the note, and left through a back corridor with measured steps. Before leaving, Alaric referenced the earlier scrape from the trench. He took a small plaster cast he had kept under a single envelope, the ridge from the first tablet he unearthed in Chapter 1, and held it next to the salvaged inner ring. Their marks lined up along an inner seam. "This connects to the ring I dug up in the field," he said. Miriam stepped closer and traced the seam with a single finger. "So you were right before Juta Moro. The pattern appears across finds." Her admission shifted the earlier argument into confirmation. The final paragraphs resolve the chapter's immediate conflict while leaving a deliberate path forward. Alaric sealed the crate again, but this time he tucked a thin folded radiograph inside the lid before resealing it, a hidden record in case the crate vanished. He closed his satchel and slid the codex strap over his shoulder. Miriam watched him, then said, "Alaric, be careful. This is not only academic now." He did not answer in words. Instead, he tapped his obsidian signet ring twice against his palm, a small ritual gesture he used before leaving for field work. Aya appeared at the doorway with the scanner drive in her hand. "I've copied the multispectral files," she said. "I already sent duplicates to Professor Nadir at the observatory by courier." The practical exchange ended the scene with action rather than introspection. Alaric stepped out into the pale dawn and locked the vault behind him. He remembered the notch he had traced in the trench, the outer ring's repeating mark that once scheduled collapse. He pulled the salvaged inner ring from his satchel and aligned it with the pencil mark he had made earlier. With his gloved finger he circled the next date, and then wrote a single note in the margin of his codex. "Trace next collapse, field reconnaissance required." He closed the codex, shouldered the satchel, and moved toward his car, the weight of suppressed schedules occupying the landscape of his decisions. A knock sounded on the archive door just as he reached the steps, measured and deliberate, and he turned toward it with his hand already at his pocket. The chapter ends with that knock, the satchel on his shoulder, and a loaded plan to follow the next marked collapse. Emotion route. suspicion, appears in the early sentences and drives Alaric's choices from cautious cataloging through defiance against institutional orders into active protection of the artifact. Emotion shifts include suspicion to alarm when palimpsest notes describe scheduled ruin, and alarm to resolve when the raid forces Alaric to salvage the inner ring and plan immediate action. The chapter ties back to the unearthed ring's discovery by matching the ridge marks in the trench to the inner ring, and it concludes on a concrete action that propels the story forward. Alaric leaves with the salvaged fragment and a plan to trace the next date. Alaric shoved the iron door and the archive smell hit him, hot metal, old glue, and burning vellum. Suspicion tightened his jaw as he saw cloaked shoulders bend over a brazier while a bound calendrical codex caught flame and peeled black along the fold. Stop. He barked and dropped his satchel. A man in a hood spun, embers flaring, and the brazier ate a whole signature within seconds. That single, immediate action, the codex fed to fire, made the central problem plain. Someone was destroying the last complete record of the calendar. He lunged across the tiled floor and struck at the nearest arm. A scrap of cloth tore and a small ring, brass, dark and ringed with concentric notches, bounced on the stone. Alaric snatched it. He had seen those scars before. The concentric rings he'd uncovered in the dig trench, the sanded edge of the crate lid back at the vault. Those discoveries had been quiet, sand and dust, the crate lid giving with a dry snap, until tonight's violence made their meaning urgent. Alaric's suspicion moved him faster than his plan. He shoved a cloaked figure back, pulling a handful of ash, doled pages free with his left hand, and barked a name, Miriam, hold them. His voice cut across the vault and drew two other figures into the light. Miriam stepped from the shadows, her palms already shaded with soot, and Hazim was at her elbow, face tight and unreadable. The three of them, together, made the immediate counterweight to the conspirators' motion. You cannot burn this, Miriam, fingers white on a singed corner. She reached for the brazier and Hazim checked the nearest conspirator with a shove. Miriam, give me those plates, Alaric. He sounded like a demand on purpose. There was too little time for nuance. Miriam handed him a partially fused ring and pushed a paper toward him with her thumb. I hid this page, she said. I altered the entries. I couldn't let them. Her voice cut off when the nearest hooded man moved. Alaric put his weight against the brazier and shoved the arm away. The man swore and bolted toward the service stair with a smoking scrap of calendrical ring hooked like a talisman. Lead, conspirator! Alaric shouted and began pursuit, Miriam and Hazim on his heels. The chase folded through narrow stoneways, steps that remembered a dozen footsteps, and a door that rattled behind them. They spilled into the corridor. Torches guttered. The stair was a single file funnel. Alaric saw the man curve and vanish through a narrow postern, the stolen fragment clutched to his chest. The sound of hurried sandals echoed. A metal clang came from above. Stop. Miriam called. Hazim left. Hazim darted and slammed a shoulder into a wooden shutter. The conspirator staggered, dropped the fragment, and dove through a hatch. Alaric scrambled after him, scraping his palms on rough stone, and caught only the tail of his robe. The stolen ring slipped free. He forced a hand into the gap and came up with cold brass. He held the fragment under torchlight and traced the same repeating notch he de-circled in the trench fragments. A small triangular gouge that recurred every 30 ticks on the inner ring. That mechanical repetition had felt like an instrument before. Now in his palm it felt like a lever. Where did you get that? Hazim, breath loud. His voice had a sharp edge. Alaric noticed the tone and the set of Hazim's jaw. They carried the fragment back to the archive antechamber, where Miriam unfolded a damp, secret sheet of marginalia and laid it on the table. I kept these because I feared what the calendar would become if the dates were known, she said. Her hands trembled, but she set the sheet flat. I changed catalogue numbers, hid ritual dates under burial entries. I thought if no one read them, no one could act on them. Alaric read a line aloud, Seventh ring aligns with purge season. Transfer follows in 6 months. The sentence hit like a confirmation. You altered official records, he asked. Miriam nodded. I did. I sat at the ledger for nights and shifted numbers. I changed custodial roles. I thought I was buying time. Suspicion that had been a pulse now slid toward alarm. Alaric looked at Hazem. Hazem, did you know? He asked. Hazem's face did not change, and his reply was a single, flat line. I saw anomalies. I said nothing. The admission was small, but it pivoted everything between them. Alaric felt his throat tighten. He pushed the margin sheet across the table and said nothing for a beat, counting the seconds while he reassembled evidence in his head. They worked until dawn. Hazem and Miriam set a makeshift table from 2 crates and a plank. Alaric cleared ash with gloved hands. The 3 of them overlaid star charts on remaining tablet fragments, aligning carved notches with recorded eclipses and recorded collapses. The patterns matched. The calendrical rings tracked a repeating astronomical cycle that had coincided with recorded political turnovers in the temple lists. Look, Hazem softly, pointing at a ring intersection where a star map overlay matched a city ledger entry for population transfer every time this variable crosses that axis. The lists show a purge or a migration. His voice held the gravity of discovery and the flatness of someone who had already seen too much. Alaric felt a shift, suspicion to dread to bitter clarity. He tapped the codex with his finger. This is not prophecy, he said. It is scheduling. They used the calendar to plan transfers of power. Miriam pressed her palm to her mouth. They timed hunger. Alaric. They time the harvest denial, then move the families that remain. Hazem's hand shook as he placed a pointer on the overlay. They engineered collapse, he said. The revelation changed the stakes from academic to criminal. Alaric wrote names and dates on a scrap and shoved the list into his satchel. He pictured the crate from the vault. The lid sanded to hide an edge, the ring lying like a pale wound in compacted sand. Those earlier discoveries were not innocent artifacts. They were parts of an instrument. He whooped a soft, incredulous sound and shook his head. They weaponized time, he said. They made inevitability a tool. Alaric wanted to take that proof to an external authority. Before he could move, Hazem's posture stiffened. A door banged open in the administrative chamber, and 2 heavy boots stopped on the threshold. Curator Nabu filled the doorway with his bulk and touched the lamp on the desk, as if to steady himself against the light. So,